Hello and welcome back to Bible Wits Bible Corner. Today we're going to pick back up in Acts chapter 23. I'm going to read the first 7 verses, starting with the English Standard Version. And looking intently at the council, Paul said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. But then Paul said to him, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law? And yet, contrary to the law, you order me to be struck." Those who stood by said, "Would you revile God's high priest?" And Paul said, "I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." Now when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. New Century Version. Paul looked at the council and said, "Brothers, I have lived my life without guilt feelings before God up to this day." Ananias, the high priest, heard this and told the men who were standing near Paul to hit him on the mouth. Paul said to Ananias, "God will hit you too. You are like a wall that has been painted white. You sit there and judge me using the law of Moses, but you are telling them to hit me, and that is against the law." The men standing near Paul said to him, "You cannot insult God's high priest like that." Paul said, "Brothers, I did not know this man was the high priest. It is written in the scriptures, you must not curse a leader of your people." Some of the men in the meeting were Sadducees and others were Pharisees. Knowing this, Paul shouted to them, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, and my father was a Pharisee. I am on trial here because I believe that people will rise from the dead." When Paul said this, there was an argument between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the group was divided. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out here is the first couple of verses here. Paul says, "I have lived my life without guilt up to this point." In other words, what I take when I read that is he wouldn't change anything that he did. He wouldn't change the fact that he was stoning Christians or anything like that, because in his mind back then, he thought he was doing that strictly for God. And then when Jesus stopped him and told him what he really needs to do, Paul, again, 110% of himself goes towards this path, just as it did when he was a Pharisee. So he wouldn't change anything. He is just fine living his life the way he lived it. So that brings up a question to a lot of us. How many of us today would be willing to say that exact same thing? I wouldn't change a thing I did in my past, because it has brought me to this point. It has taught me this and this about life, or whatever the reason may be. But still, the question, how many would say they would not change a single thing about the way they have lived? Now, I know that there is some talk, even among Christians, people that have been Christians for years and years, saying that part of them wishes they had been Christians even at a younger age so they wouldn't do all the quote unquote stupid stuff they did when they were younger. But at the same time, what did they learn when they did that stuff? How did they learn to fully trust in God? There's all those questions to answer with that. Now, moving on with this passage. Paul looks at this crowd and he can easily see that it's divided up between Pharisees and Sadducees. So he tells them he is a Pharisee. I find it actually interesting that he still keeps that title as Pharisee, but I think he is using that title differently. In fact, I could almost be certain that he's using that title more differently than the actual Pharisees use it. But anyway, he's using that, and he's saying that he is on trial because he believes that people can be raised from the dead. That is a common Christian belief because Jesus himself was raised from the dead. And when we die, our spiritual bodies will be raised. Our physical bodies are going to go away when this world goes away, but our spiritual bodies will be raised. So, and Paul firmly believes that. So he starts an argument amongst the Pharisees and Sadducees. Who are we going to start legitimate arguments among? Who are we going to question so that we can get down to the root of what the truth really is? I hope you find encouragement in this, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful God-centered day. Thank you. Bye.